So I wish you a very nice beginning of this session, and I present you the chair, who is Gamini Wijesuria. Apologies for the certainly wrong pronunciation. A special advisor to the Director General of ICCROM, Rome in Italy, special advisor to the Director of the WITRAP in Shanghai in China, and also former project manager at ICCROM. So Gamini, welcome, and the floor is all yours.
Let me first of all send greetings from Sri Lanka in our traditional manner, saying Ayubowan, which is perhaps the safest way of greeting during the pandemic without shaking hands or hugging. That means, may you live long, not because of pandemic, but this is the traditional way of doing it. Thank you for the invitation to share this session. This session is about rethinking capacity strengthening for sustainable development. The goal of the session, you may have read, is to stimulate a discussion on this topic and contribute directly to the formation of a research agenda, action plan, and policy brief for better operationalizing sustainable development for heritage. To achieve this goal, as you know, the organizers have identified 3 provocation presentations, which you will hear immediately after. And then after listening to them, you are expected to form into groups, as you heard, and try to respond to several questions. Indeed, this is a cross-cutting theme applicable to all themes that were discussed, I believe. So please keep that in mind. Having worked in the field as the Director of Conservation of Sri Lanka for 20 years, I moved to the training sector and worked particularly on World Heritage at ICCROM for 15 years. However, I had the opportunity of playing a key role in the development of the 2011 World Heritage Capacity Building Strategy, which I believe is the reason why I'm here to talk about this theme. We consider this a paradigm shift of moving from conventional training to capacity building collectively by, it's also interesting, both sectors, cultural and natural heritage. I'm also aware that since this is an academic forum, education for the academic sector think beyond capacity building for good reasons. I think together with Professor Bill Logan, we have addressed these issues in an article, The New Heritage Studies and Education, Training, and Capacity Building, in case someone is interested in reading. By recognizing the importance of contributions by the academics, the needs on the ground must be the basis for identifying capacity building priorities as our sector moves further forward, considering the well-being of society as inseparable from the well-being of heritage. We were influenced in relation to the definition of capacity strengthening or capacity building. We were influenced by the UNDP definition. They think the capacity building as the process through which, I quote, individuals, organizations, and societies obtain, strengthen, and maintain the capacities to set and achieve their own development objectives over time. Based on this definition, we endeavored to think where the capacities reside for more effective management of heritage. We then identified respective audiences, the need to strengthen of their capacities. They are summarized as practitioners, policy and decision makers, and finally communities and network. I'm sure my colleague Eugene Jo also will talk about these things. To strengthen the capacities of all these diverse audiences, new learning areas, methods, and institutions for sharing them have to be recognized. And please keep this in mind during your group work. Let me also share a word about the favorite theme, sustainable development. I have heavily involved in several themes discussed yesterday, namely linking nature culture, disaster risk management, as well as the people-centered approach to be discussed in the future, all under the umbrella of capacity development. The theme sustainable development was a core subject in all of them, some dating back to 1997 and continued up to the development of UNESCO Policy on Sustainable Development in 2015. In a paper titled From Sustaining Heritage to Heritage Sustaining Broader Societal Well-Being and Benefit for Sustainable Development with my colleague Jane Thompson, we have shared some of the challenges that we faced during our training programs. Let me highlight 4 of them for your consideration. 1, change in the mindset of a generation of heritage practitioners strongly entrenched in the conventional Western conservation approaches. Number 2, there is still resistance and a need to digest the idea of managing change and sustainable development. Number 3, there is a need to secure progress in all 3 areas mentioned before, where heritage capacities reside, and look outside the heritage arena for ways to approach sustainable development considerations more effectively. The 4th one, the need on the ground must be the basis for identifying capacity building priorities. So with that, I suggest that you keep this in mind when you are discussing in your groups. And with that short note, let me request the first intervention by my colleague, Eugene Zhou, from ICCROM, who is the program manager of the World Heritage Leadership. Eugene, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gamini, and thank you very much, everybody, for inviting me first to speak in this conference and session, and also for the introduction. Gamini actually just stole a lot of the material that I was going to present in my presentation. No, but it's all very relevant and valid, and I hope I'll do justice of his work that he's been doing for the last 20, 30 years in the field of heritage conservation and capacity building. So let me just share my screen. I think the host disabled participant screen sharing, so could you allow me to screen share? Yeah, excellent. So I would just like to start off by saying that I'm Eugene Zhou and I work at ICCROM, currently based in Rome, Italy. And I'm the program manager of the ICCROM IUCN World Heritage Leadership Program. And as you can see throughout my presentation, you'll notice that I'm using the word capacity building instead of capacity strengthening, for which it's the adopted term within the World Heritage sector, as Gamini explained, by the adoption of the 2011 capacity building strategy. But I believe it's a commonly understood terminology that can be used interchangeably with capacity strengthening. As you might have guessed from my title, the program that I manage is a jointly delivered program between IUCN and ICCROM, but also in collaboration with ICOMOS and UNESCO World Heritage Center. For those of you who might not know, the 3 institutions, other than UNESCO, are the 3 advisory bodies to the World Heritage Convention, covering each cultural heritage, natural heritage, and also capacity building. And the program itself, it's designed to be a capacity building program, primarily focusing on World Heritage to improve the conservation and management of World Heritage sites all over the world. It's a program that's supported by the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment, with the Swiss and Korean governments also supporting some of the activities. Now, the program was conceived on the premise that heritage is facing global threats and risks wherever they are in the world in their own different contexts of climate change, of developments. And we, the heritage community, are not so quite well prepared to address these challenges, not because we don't understand the problem that is facing us, but also quite rooted in the fact that we don't understand why we're doing what we're doing. And this is actually revealed quite poignantly in the analysis of the state of conservation reports of World Heritage Sites, where it's actually the management and institutional factors that rank the highest as the issues causing threats to World Heritage, more so than the actual threats of developments or disasters. It's actually rather our own actions and practices that are unable to deal appropriately to the changes facing heritage, causing more hindrance than support in protecting these sites. And looking at the key issues for which properties enter into the reactive monitoring process, it's clear that problems of isolating heritage from other sectors actually penalize heritage rather than protecting it. And this is an acute problem because of all the different factors that actually impact the heritage and cause detrimental effects to the effective management of heritage, they actually come from beyond the confines of the site itself. And however good and well able-minded the site manager is, they have very limited capacity to forge change when the change is actually coming from outside of the heritage. And these gaps are not merely in separating nature and culture, but in a way also that we are trained as professionals. So we are, most of us, trained as heritage experts of one particular field, either of archaeology, of architecture, of conservation science, so on and so forth. And yet when we're actually facing the management realities of a heritage site, it's actually the responsibilities of managing a whole place, which is far from anything else that we've been trained as an expert in one particular field. And there is certainly a big gap between the academic training that we have received and the actual realities that we have faced in terms of addressing. So the approach that's adopted by the World Heritage Leadership Program is to actually have a place-based approach, and where heritage is actually recognized to be situated within an environmental, social, and economic context, where it is impacted by, and it also causes impacts on different facets of that particular place. So we think that capacity building is not about transferring knowledge or information. It's not about training, as Gamini has highlighted at the beginning of the session, but it's actually a process where we're able to network and learn and empower others. We're able to actually pick up what is actually working on the ground and make sure that that is translated into a scalable and reapplicable message that can also influence others. So it's more of a process. And it's basically to suggest diverse pathways and make people want to adopt new practices and new ways of doing their daily jobs. And I often think that when such so-called sort of groundbreaking research results or policies are being made or announced, these are not so much groundbreaking findings, but they're more groundbreaking realizations of what is happening on the ground, I think. And in fact, practice on the ground are oftentimes very much more ahead than we are talking about in terms of research or policy. So the program's objective is actually to create a network where we can continuously provide for the flow of shared news and information, and providing an opportunity for people to learn from other sites and how other people are actually doing their job, and creating an atmosphere where the change comes voluntarily and with a very strong conviction. And then the way that the program operates with 2 lines of work, where one line is about producing knowledge, it's about compiling manuals, guidance, toolkits, and so on. And then the other is about implementation of capacity building activities and networking. And these are actually not separate. They continuously flow into each other and feed into each other. And everything that we pick up from these networking and activities automatically are then also, we try to translate them into the different guidances and tools that we're developing, so that what we're doing on the ground also gets to be referenced and reflected in documented practice as well. And as Gamini highlighted in his introduction, it's one of the most important aspects about the 2011 World Heritage Capacity Building Strategy was that it recognized that we need to target all the different capacities residing in all different areas of society. And it's not just the capacity of individual practitioners that we need to build up, but it's to strengthen the relationship between the communities and networks, being able to work through institutional structures and processes, so that we can create an enabling environment that will be forging change in the way that we practice heritage conservation. And one of them, through our program, we focus on bringing about a paradigm shift of trying to explain why we need to change and how that change can actually contribute to practicing or achieving these sustainable development goals. And whereas in the past, we've persevered to protect the physical fabric of heritage, of individual monuments and sites, and aimed to ward off any negative impacts on heritage, where the results, the whole practice was contained within conservation experts and professionals themselves. We're now trying to, there's a bit of a mishap with my slide. I'm sorry. We're now trying to recognize that it's the values that are held by the people that is embedded and associated with the heritage itself, which is most important. And that with the change of society, heritage also has to change. It's about managing the level of change and continuity, which is driven by society. We can't possibly isolate heritage from the world and contain it in a vacuum of protection, but nor should we actually accept any kind of change and accept that any kind of detrimental change can happen, and that there can be positive change as well as negative change. And the results that we aim for needs to be aimed for the well-being, achieving of well-being of society and of heritage both. But when we implement workshops and courses, we find that many heritage site managers are actually way ahead of the game. And most of them are actually more than devout converts of this paradigm shift already. They come to the course already recognizing the importance of having this paradigm shift, and they're already shifted in their paradigms. The only problem is that we can't follow up in terms of actually providing them with the right tools and processes that they can adopt to change the way that they practice heritage conservation. So it's within this vein that the program is currently working on merging a lot of the existing materials and resources of managing nature and culture, disaster risks, and conducting impact assessments. And we need to be able to provide the actual methods and tools to make sure that heritage can contribute to sustainable development and stay relevant to society. And the new resources being developed focuses on the fact that the relationship between the heritage and the place and its people is actually the core baseline for us to start all our actions and policies. And our goal in trying to make this come about is to establish a simple knowledge framework that can be applicable to all heritage places, and which would provide the basic concepts of what is needed for managing a heritage place. Of course, these are only the common elements that we've extrapolated from many different ways of practice. However, they can be useful tools and useful nodes to provide guidance, and practitioners can select the most important elements that they find useful to fulfill their own objectives and fitting the specificities of their sites. Those of you who attended the session yesterday on biocultural diversity would have heard about the Panorama platform that was presented by my colleague Maya Shizawa. And it's one of our attempts to collect diverse case studies of how heritage management is being practiced on the ground, and how these kind of information and knowledge also need to be connected to future research and policy development. And we recognize that addressing all the SDGs is not an easy task, and it certainly cannot be done overnight suddenly. It needs prioritization, it needs strategic thinking, and it does actually involve making very difficult choices and management decisions. Therefore, I think it's very, very crucial that capacity building has this very strong role to play in allowing people to be equipped with that decision-making rigor. And I don't intend for you to actually read all of this, but this is an excerpt from an external evaluation that was conducted on our program last year to see how it's actually faring. Is it actually doing a good job of answering the objectives that was set out? And one of the interesting things that I've highlighted from one of the key passages was the repeated appearance of the word continuity and communication. And I think those are some of the key elements of capacity building that we really need to think about to ensure that it's continuously provided and is continuously invested for, and that the key for success is actually through diverse and continuous communication. And lastly, just to close off, I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges that I hoped that I might be able to find answers to through the sessions today. And one of them is to how do we make sure that capacity building is recognized or acknowledged as one of the most cost-effective and practical ways of improving conservation practice for sustainable development. And we also need to sort of always grapple with the fact that people normally want answers, a simple answer, a magic solution that would completely fix everything when they come to different capacity building courses and activities. But it's really not about that. It's about promoting a different way of thought and process of doing the job. And how do we make sure that those kind of recognition is rooted in the ground, and that we need to really get better at needing appropriate investments, and investments of perhaps not of money, but actually of continued commitment from institutions and organizations and time allocation to be able to recognize the power of capacity building and how that can influence the way that we work. So with that, I close my presentation, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Eugene. I think you highlighted and expanded few of the concepts I highlighted in my very cryptic presentation. Thank you. I'm sure these will be taken up by the groups who will expand this, and you highlighted the new learning areas and the importance of addressing all audiences and developing tools and networking and all those things. Thank you. And can I now go to the next intervention? This is a joint intervention by Professor Lorenda Polesi from Stonebrook University and Dr. Nelson Mamlo from University of Namibia. Please.
So good morning or good afternoon or good evening, since I think the audience for this session will come from all over the world. I am Loredana Polesi, currently at Stony Brook University in the US, and my colleague.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Nelson Mlambo, a senior lecturer in the Department of Language and Literature Studies at the University of Namibia. And it is a great pleasure to be co-presenting with Loredana Polesi about research, heritage, and multilingual practices.
Excellent. So before we launch into the things that we want to really say to you, let me tell you a little bit about how we came to work together. I was involved in a large project, and in fact, it's two of us speaking to you here today, and it's important that it is two of us, but it should be many more. The project was a very large one. which started as a large grant under the Translating Cultures scheme in the UK. And then that took us to connecting with a public engagement project of the University of Namibia and the University of Cardiff called the Phoenix Project. And from that, we got to Transnationalizing Modern Languages, Global Challenges, which took me and a number of other colleagues to Namibia and to work with Nelson.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Loredana has said, with the Transnationalizing Modern Languages Global Challenges project, as well as the Phoenix Project and the University of Namibia, we had the opportunity to collaboratively work on high impact projects in Namibia. And maybe perhaps let me say that as a way for providing you with some background information on the setting of our project. Namibia is a Southern African country with a population of approximately 2.5 million people. And the country has about 30 languages, and English is the official languages. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think you can agree with me that Namibia thus presented us with a remarkable case study of super multilingualism in this rainbow nation. However, allow me also to highlight that we can have some challenges with regards to inclusivity, social cohesion, and collective well-being in such a situation. However, we had to try and valorize both tangible and intangible heritage as core pillars of human dignity and the attainable of sustainable development goals.
So before we talk about a few keywords which we think can summarize the main pillars of our project, I want to tell you a story. There are many episodes which have stuck with us, which are very significant about the work that we did together. But I'll just tell you one. At one point, at the end of one of our workshops with the medical school of the University of Namibia, a young woman, a final year student in the medical degree there, stood up and said, okay, you have been talking to us about language and translation and multilingualism, and I never thought about it this way. But every time I do practical experience in a health center, perhaps a rural hospital, whenever I have had to ask for an interpreter, my exact words have been, I need an interpreter because the patient doesn't speak English. What does that say about my relationship with my patients? Now, for us, that's a very significant story because it means that the penny had dropped for her. She was starting to think about language, and she was starting to think about language as positioning, language as power, language as a tool of inclusion or of exclusion. And this, it should be noted, was a young woman for whom English was not her first language, probably not even her second language, but it was a professional language, the one she identified with as a doctor. So the first keyword that I want to talk about, or the first expression that I want to talk about here and to underline, especially in the context of this conference, is the difference between the notion of language as heritage and a heritage language. In a number of contexts, especially here in the US where I am now, heritage language is often used in a way which is at least partly negative. It marks out, it minoritizes a language and the speakers of those languages as members of a community which does not have perfect command of the standard, which is assumed to be English, even in a country like the States, which do not have an official language. And it also points constantly and only to the past. It sort of equates language with almost a biological inheritance, but does not underline what I think language as heritage underlines. And that's what Nelson just said. Language as the ultimate intangible heritage. Language as a richness, a wealth that we carry with us, and which can be an integral part of society rather than being seen as a problem. And that takes me back to the example of the student, the medical student, and the question of sensitization. Over to you, Nelson.
Yes, Loredana. Taking the thread of argument from there, I think what was central to our project was the major concern with sensitization raising awareness and brokering inclusivity. That was quite critical. And as such, what we did was to find a multidisciplinary and cross-disciplinary approach, and what we can call a 360 sort of degree approach to tackle global challenges of concern. So what we had was a team of language specialists, medical specialists, and policymakers working together to find solutions that promote well-being, improve access to health, and collective socio-economic development. That was what was key to our project. And we found that the sensitization of stakeholders about the role and value of our languages as well as our cultural heritage is the surest way to bring about lasting impact. Maybe just to cite one example, we saw this through the implementation of best practices in the inclusion of languages components within the MED in anesthesia training program. That was quite significant, and we worked very well with the Phoenix project. And perhaps let me hasten to say that Namibia has been reliant on expatriate medical personnel, and as such, researching about multilingual practices in the professional training of health personnel was a giant leap in the right direction. Not only with regards to the preservation of our heritage, but also bring about sustainable developmental services coming closer to the people. And this could be attained through the use of language, and also having to understand the role of languages, multilingualism, and our culture with regards to what the people desire. And this is something which we're also taking a step further with regards to the present COVID-19 pandemic, and we're doing it through the My Hero project, which Loredana can also elaborate on just in a second.
So yes, the other side of our project was always working with schools and working with young children and education. And again, the sensitization of young children, of teachers, of parents about the importance of understanding how linguistic heritage, so language as heritage, can be seen as a resource rather than a problem, than an issue. And so now under COVID-19, we've undertaken the translation of a small book, an illustrated book for children, My Hero is You, into 5 of the minoritized languages, of the indigenous languages of the country, again, to grant access and also to valorize heritage once again. And that takes me to the last point I want to make, which is about the concept of language indifference. That's a concept that we developed working together. And language indifference is what happens every time we don't pay attention to language. And it goes back to the question of sensitization and to the fact that we need to train not just specialists, not just linguists or translators or interpreters, but we need to train also the users, the people who will benefit from their services. And also to the fact, the other important fact in language indifference is that if we resist language indifference, if we go against the pull of monolingualism, we also start to see that translation and monolingualism, for instance, are not two opposites among themselves, but rather a part of a spectrum of behavior. Our everyday lives are made of constant acts of translation, and multilingualism and translation inhabit our spaces all the time. I think that's a fantastic example for me of what we learned together and how working together was an example of research as conversation. I'll finish on that and let you, Nelson, draw this to a close.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a way of concluding, what were some of our carry-home lessons? This is it. It is critical for us to collaboratively work together as co-researchers who can co-create solutions that have got lasting and sustainable impacts in the lives of people. This project which we had saw both the UK and the Namibian beneficiaries and researchers learning a lot from one another. And that of us is the true mark of collaborative research and equal partnerships, especially with regards to research that valorizes our heritage as citizens of the world. And with those words, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nelson.
Thank you both. This is a fantastic presentation. And of course, language is a heritage. And also, as you heard language from my colleague, Tim Badman, language is a problem. I know my colleague, Eugene Doe, and the team is addressing this in all their activities happening outside Rome in training courses and so on, looking at the issues of languages. Language is a problem, and also the solutions are found in languages. So this is something that your lessons will teach the group or share with the group to look for way forward in strengthening capacities in the heritage sector. So with that, let me invite Ms. Helen Jones, Director of Global Engagement and Strategy, Science Museum Group, UK. Helen, over to you.
Hello, everybody, again. It's great to be with you all this morning. So thanks very much for the opportunity, and thanks very much to the previous speakers as well. It's been great. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So I'm going to speak very briefly about some of the international work of the UK's Science Museum Group, why we do it, and how it contributes to capacity building in the museum and science centre sectors. Firstly, I'll just introduce the Science Museum Group to you. We have 6 sites located throughout England, and together, collectively, we form the UK's National Museum of Science and Industry. There's some stats there that you can see on our reach and scope. We share a vision and a mission that are about the place of science in our world and in our lives, stories of human ingenuity and endeavour. We're about science as part of our culture, our heritage, and our future. Our long-term strategy is based on 7 key priorities, and I've highlighted on the slide here those that are most relevant to our theme today. Top of the list, you'll see, is to increase science capital. And science capital is a term that's becoming increasingly used. It refers to an evidence-based approach that takes into account not just what somebody knows about science, but all the influences that affect their attitudes and their confidence regarding science. It's emphatically not just about formal teaching and learning. It's as much about social equity. Increasing science capital increases life choices and chances, but people start from different places and some need more help than others. Notice that I've also highlighted increasing income. Most of our funding comes directly from the state, but this is decreasing and we need to generate income in order to sustain and grow our public services. So focusing on our international work, you can see that generating income occurs again here in this list of our motivations for international working. It's not the only one, of course, and it's certainly not the main one. Developing our sector, as I've called it, or capacity building, has always been a driver, but income has inevitably risen up our agenda. We're chiefly, though, driven by our mission, enabling more people to participate in the debates and decisions that shape our lives, as individuals, as communities, and as nations. Global challenges such as climate change and good health demand global understanding and cooperation. So while I'm talking, you might consider the degree to which these different drivers are compatible, or are they in conflict, and come up with some points for the discussion. These are some of the activities that comprise our international work, and which in our organisation are managed by 2 separate teams. We tend to refer to them as shorthand, strategic and commercial. But of course, in practice, there's no such hard and fast division. Relationships that start as commercial transactions may develop into sustainable partnerships, and strategic partners may well include paid-for elements. Through the Science Museum Group Academy, we do offer formal training courses in public engagement for science teachers, communicators, and practitioners, and overseas users are required to pay for these. A range of touring exhibitions is available, also for a fee, and that fee can be very high for the big blockbuster shows. But we've also tried to be imaginative in sharing our content and expertise more widely, creating new alliances and attracting new funds that deliver on our mission. And I want to illustrate this with a short case study. So Superbugs, The Fight for Our Lives, is an exhibition about the important and urgent issue of antibiotic resistance, which is exposing humankind to the devastating consequences of illnesses that we thought we had conquered. The exhibition aims to explain the issues, demonstrate how our individual choices and behaviours can make a difference, and illustrate the global scientific effort to combat the problem. It was shown at the Science Museum in 2017-18, and it proved surprisingly popular with medical professionals. We then shared it in what we call a blueprint pack. None of the structure or artifacts travel, just the intellectual property. That's the research, plans, designs, events, ideas, and so on. And the exhibition is remade by each venue, adapting it to suit the local context. So it's much cheaper to hire than a conventional exhibition, and only data need travel, so it's highly sustainable. Clearly, the main sustainable development goal that the exhibition supports is health, but it also supports education and careers, innovation and partnership. Outside of the Science Museum in London, 1.5 million people have seen the show in the countries listed. In bold are the countries that are eligible for UK official development aid. I've also picked out in the box India and China. In this case, the Science Museum itself successfully bid for funding from the Wellcome Trust to take the exhibition and an associated schools and families programme to 4 venues in each of these countries where inappropriate use of antibiotics is extremely high. So that's where most of the 1.5 million visits came from, and it didn't cost the host venues anything. I have a few pictures here to show how different the exhibition could look in different places. Some retained the rather white, clinical vibe of the London show, whereas others opted for something very different, including some fantastical artworks. And this gives some idea of adaptation to local context and audiences. For example, the Indian exhibition included a section on Ayurvedic medicine, and they produced a puppet show, which is important for conveying messages to audiences who may be illiterate. The exhibition made good use of individual narratives of medics, patients, farmers, designers, researchers, etc., who all play a role in the antibiotic resistance story. Local role models were identified in each country, highlighting the part they play in the global effort and generating pride and respect, which I think you can see on the faces of some of the people who came to the launch who were featured in the exhibition. And perhaps they'll inspire young people to follow such careers. So what did the partner venues get out of the Superbugs project? Well, obviously they got an exhibition at relatively low cost or no cost in India and China, plus the associated events programme. The Wellcome project included detailed audience research and evaluation, something that the Science Museum excels in, but which was underdeveloped in China and India and some of the other venues. For some venues, for example, in Moscow and Buenos Aires, this was their first international collaboration, and they took the exhibition on a fees basis, but the Science Museum was able to connect them with sponsors. And we remain in contact with all of the venues and have already started further collaborative projects with some of them. They may be encouraged to try new things. For instance, the Moscow host had seen our Science Museum late, when the museum feels more like a nightclub than a museum. And they use Superbugs as an opportunity to try this kind of thing to attract new audiences, those notoriously hard to reach young adults. The exhibitions could be occasions for media and stakeholder interest. Top right is a press conference in India, where there was a lot in the media about the exhibition. The picture at the top left is Buenos Aires, where the Science and Technology Minister spoke alongside the British ambassador. And also in Buenos Aires, it was the Science Museum that made the connection with the Argentinian's own Ministry of Health, who came to the launch events and realised how effectively science centres could be used for important public messaging. And thinking about perceptions, at the bottom of the screen, there's pages from a Google search and a TripAdvisor page about Culiacan in Mexico, where the Science Center is one of the top attractions. How much better to promote tourism with a great cultural offer in a city better known for crime and violence? Of course, I can't claim a massive impact from our modest exhibition in this, but I like to think it plays a part. So, although Superbugs wasn't conceived explicitly for capacity building, I am confident that through peer-to-peer exchange and cooperation, it did fulfill this function. And I refer back to Eugene's definitions of capacity strengthening, networking, peer learning, and empowering. There's a need and an appetite for more work like this, but I'm concerned that it will be more difficult as the economic environment tightens, and it will remain reliant on stop-start project funding. Eugene also mentioned continuity. How can we strengthen our own capacity to do more and to sustain the benefits? How do we make the case internally and externally for such activity amongst many competing priorities? Here echoing Helen McLagan's question in the chat. So I hope we might address some of these in the discussions, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I think one of the key things we came up with the capacity building strategy is that there are no single way of sharing knowledge. There are various ways going beyond our conventional training activities. There are various ways of strengthening capacities of different groups, different audiences. So you very well highlighted a variety of things, including international cooperation, which is going. So, yeah, you were talking about increasing science capital, which is one of the key things, and different ways of different themes to be addressed and different ways of sharing knowledge. I think these are very important lessons that I believe the groups will discuss and help to develop a future strategy for strengthening capacities or sharing capacities. Thank you. And with that, we have little time for Q&A. Francesca, do you have any suggestion for how to proceed with that? We have about 10 minutes. Should I?
Yes, I'm collecting a few questions from the chat. Do you prefer that I read them or?
Yes, please go ahead so that.
Okay, so there is a very quick question for Helen. So T. Queen Evans asked this one. So you mentioned 6 sites in England. Are there any in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales?
Right, no, we have no sites in Wales, but we do work with other museums and other organisations right across the UK. We're funded by the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and culture is what we call a devolved function. So the other home countries of Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland have their own culture departments, but we work in particular with the national museums in each of the home countries.
Any other questions?
Yes, so I looked at in the chat, some of them were already answered, so this is why I'm not picking them up. But there is one interesting question from Stuart, saying that most of his work has focused on global development and capacity building as a particular overtones, which has a particular overtones, positive and negative there. Is it the same to do capacity building in the global north and in the global south? What about power relationships and who builds whose capacity? So I think now the question is really how can we address the topic of capacity building in both the global south and the global north? I think for everyone.
Believe, yes. Eugene, you want to start? Or?
I could, possibly not with a very intelligent answer, but I think it sort of goes back to the issue of languages as well, doesn't it? Because we also did a sort of an in-house kind of crunching of numbers regarding the different resources and bibliographies that we share within the courses and the capacity building activities that we do, and of the different documents that we reference to build up different materials, and they're mostly obviously from the English-speaking world or the Western world. And there is, and the type of resource people that we bring into our courses, although we do strive as much as possible to be able to gather a diverse range of resource people coming from all different backgrounds and also not necessarily contained within the heritage sector, it's very difficult for us to even acknowledge and identify, who are the key players in all the various different languages or in the various different contexts. And absolutely, I think, in a way, although we are trying to overcome that issue, we are also kind of adding on the burden of accumulating on top of what has been accumulated before. So I'd never, while I was operating in Korea, where I originally come from, I'd never really thought about how we do things in Korea. I've actually been thinking more about it ever since I've come to ECROM and looking back on those practices and now realizing, oh, that is what we used to do differently, but I never really realized it when I was there. So it's the change of perspective that's really getting me more focused on these kind of issues, I think.
Can
I come in on that quickly? Because I think, just to thank Eugene for that and to reiterate, I think the issue here, for instance, language is a very interesting, immediate way of seeing things once we look for it. So where is the burden of translation, for instance? If the burden of translation is always on those who do not speak the language of that discourse, over the last couple of days, Kim Badman, Gabriel, others have mentioned the question of which discourse does the heritage, the heritage world sort of use, and what languages does it use? And there is a question of inclusivity and exclusivity or exclusion that is built already into that. The other thing that I would say is that the question that the Stuart raised is also connected to something that Clara mentioned, which is why are certain key countries coming up all the time? Is there a question that is also the link to funding, for instance? And I remember at one point being shown by UKRI, the UK funding agency, a map of where the funding was going over the last few years outside the UK. And I'm sure this is changing all the time, but there was a certain, I'm trying to use my language carefully here. There was a certain overlap between old colonial maps and old imperial maps and the way that the funding flows, which is something that we should also be aware of. So, and again, language and post-colonial languages, of course, have a role in reinstating certain connections or certain inclusions and exclusions there too. So for me, language works there as a quick litmus test almost. You can see certain things happening once you look.
Thank you. Helen, you want to add something? I think this is, you also work in North-South. And
yes, no, it's a very good question. And there is a danger of things becoming self-perpetuating. Our partnerships and people we work with come in a variety of ways. Some we've worked with before and built up professional networks. So, we know where something is likely to land well and that we can work with. And you could argue that you get better value from sustaining those relationships. In fact, I would argue that, rather than a little bit here and a little bit there all over the place that very easily becomes dissipated. Other times people come to us. So Superbugs and other exhibitions went to Mexico because it was their initiative to come and approach us. Other places like China and India, we've made a specific strategic decision to build up a presence there and went and looked for partners to work with. We are not tied to or completely driven by, but certainly take notice of government priorities. So we look at not only ODA eligible countries, but also where trade and diplomatic links are important to the government, because we are very much part of that soft power agenda. There's another question for debate there about the links between those two areas. So it's very variable. But of course, for an organisation that, as we said, has many priorities and has to seek funding ourselves for most of the things that we do, one does tend to, look towards where the opportunities are, and it's much harder to make new opportunities. But I accept that is an imperfect model.
Nelson, you must be having some views on this. Or you want to?
Okay, can I jump in? Because there is a request from the chat for picking up a question from Carlos Jaramillo. So maybe, okay. Nelson, you would be happy to have a way with the next question. So Carlos says, scholarship, knowledge, and data outside the system is a necessity. The Eurocentric and its colonial past approach on cultural heritage has placed the Global South in an arm's-length wheel of UNESCO's expert committees, charts, toolkits, and conventions. We, practitioners, know that cultural heritage, as we know it, is not sustainable. How an unsustainable industry can contribute for a sustainable future? Good question.
Do you all agree with that? It's not sustainable. Yes, we do agree things are changing. This is why we think conservation is all about continuity and change. But anyone want to make a comment on that? Anyone from the panel? Yes, Helen?
Only to really echo the two-way nature of the relationships, and we do genuinely try and build reciprocal relationships. And I would say we have learned a lot through our international working. And our drivers on the slide, it talks about not just developing the sector, but developing ourselves as an organisation and as individuals as well. That's really important. And I agree it didn't really come over, but it's one, very important, and two, very enjoyable as well.
Can I?
Yes, please, yeah. Eugene.
Because I was reading both parts of Carlos's questions, and there's another part that talks about monopolizing narratives and who gets to define what is heritage and not. And I think that's one of the key questions that is overwhelmingly sort of dominating a lot of the conversations in the World Heritage sector, and nonetheless in the wider heritage sector as a whole. And it's possibly something that merits a lot more discussion and rethinking about the frameworks that we operate in, and what do we actually recognize as heritage? Is it the brand, is it the stamp, or is it the valuation process that we undertake in order to protect it and recognize it? And in many cases, yes, World Heritage is a brand. A lot of the nationally recognized sort of lists and registers can operate as a brand, but it's also in the way of how we sustain those brands that we can change our practice and perhaps hope to be more inclusive and participatory and allowing for multiple narratives as well. There are all these different discussions about having contested heritage and contested values, and whose narrative that we would be highlighting in the process of recognizing a certain place as a heritage. And that's also one of the reasons why within the new resources that we're trying to put forward, although we do recognize that for the case of World Heritage, because we're operating under a certain framework of a convention that we cannot change, there are certain ways that we do need to adhere to and respect in order to maintain the system itself. But at the same time, we're not confining ourselves to say that that is the only system, and that there are many different realities and many different heritage sites and values that are out there that may not necessarily be already captured within the World Heritage system. And it's actually up to us as heritage practitioners to realize that and to reach out and be able to pull that into our realm of practices, even though it may not be recognized as World Heritage. So I think there's a lot of room for us to play a bigger role out there to be able to change how we operate and how we think about these frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you for all the speakers. And I apologize for those who raised questions and we were unable to answer them right now, we'll see whether there is any other mechanism. I think it's time to go into group work. Tilly, it's over to you.
Thank you, Gamini. Very much appreciated. We will be moving into breakout rooms. However, firstly, Francesco, I just want to check if there are any further questions from panelists. I'm aware that Nelson hasn't had a chance to engage with anyone, so I'd like to give him the opportunity.
Yes, actually, I would ask Nelson to, if you want to say something in relation to the conversation we already have, because we are sorry that we had to cut your answer before. So please have your say. We are very much looking forward to it.
Sure. Thank you very much. I wanted to contribute something with regards to the issue of collaboration and partnerships. Are they equal? And also the issue of funding, how it is political, and also the issue of power. And of course, I really concur and I can testify to that. And also the streams as to where exactly does the funding go, which specific countries, and the issue of inclusion and exclusion. But what I may sort of say is that beyond what we cannot control is when we get the funding, how can we possibly make sure that there is equal partnership? And using the experiences which we have had, I think the issue of co-researching and co-creation, and also realizing that the Global South and Global North, they can also learn one from each other. That was what we saw to be actually working very well. What exactly is the role of the researchers, and how do these researchers carry out the research once they receive the funding? That is what we can control in most of the cases. And for me, that is what was important.
Thank you very much, Nelson. That was great. Really appreciate it and your feedback. And thank you everyone for speaking. It's been really interesting. And I'm excited to get everyone out into their breakout groups so we can all continue the conversation on a bit in smaller groups. So hopefully a little more debate, a little more challenge, and plenty of time to talk things through.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back. I hope you had a good discussion and sometimes heated debates. Shall we start asking the group to make their presentations? I was sitting with Nicole's group. Nicole, you want to start?
Yeah. Thank you, Gamini. Actually, I was very happy to be in Gamini's group because it's always very important to, I think, feed on his long experience on capacity building. We had a very, very interesting conversation. There were a lot of interesting points that have been raised by Nelson, by Didier, by Clara. There was Janine. So very many different people have contributed to what I'm about to say. And we look specifically at two questions. The first question being a little bit what kind of future research and practical action are needed. And the second one to look more closely at improving partnership and collaboration. So in terms of future research and practical action needed, there was a strong agreement and underlining the need for multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and multi-regional approaches to kind of especially understand that everyone can have a say, especially in relation to heritage, and that we need also to move forward from the idea that only a conservator can actually have authority in saying, on doing determinate things in relation to heritage. The other element that was found is that there is the need to actually have a discussion on capacity building and understanding who's building who, what is the interrelation between the building aspect and the being built. And it's really this point of also needing further research in strengthening the voices of minorities and different groups, especially those groups that are in a position usually of not being listened to or not being heard. And in this sense, there is also the need to further dialogue and actually understand better who do we need to talk to? How much actually research do we need to do before we start even talking in relation to managing a site and or understanding a site? In terms of what needs to be improved for better partnership, listening has been really the key word. We need to learn to listen more, to actually spend more time listening to one another, but also listening to different groups. And there is the need to really look at the future in building equal partnerships, in partnerships where there is no strong hierarchical difference in this sense, but actually to work more as peers rather than enabling paternalistic or patronizing approaches. There is one issue that, in order to improve collaboration, need to be tackled, which is the aspect of narratives. Narratives that are given to heritage places, that are given to even arts and culture. We need to understand who's giving the narrative, who's controlling this narrative, so that we can actually overcome them and we can create narratives that are more inclusive. And in this sense, what's really important is that element of networking that was also brought up at the beginning into Eugene's presentation, not only networking with one another at a distance, but also better networking at the place level, and this sharing experiences and sharing the expertise that resides within different capacities. We have also identified 3 main challenges. The first one is the use of the term expert. And we need to start asking ourselves a little bit more strongly, who is the expert? Who are the expert? And Gamini actually used a very good example of the UN system where one can be defined an expert after 6 months of serving in a committee or in a project, which actually raises a little bit of a series of troubles with that, because who's the expert, for example, on vernacular heritage, if not the people and those communities who have built their heritage places and who care for these places. Another challenge is funding institutions in relation to research. At times the criteria are bounded to specific countries, and it's not very clear why certain countries, for example, could access to certain funding while others shouldn't. And one of the examples was actually from our colleague from South Africa and saying, I'm from Zimbabwe, but I couldn't access this funding that were eligible for everyone around me in terms of regional context. Last but not least, the point that came out strongly is decolonizing publication. A lot of the publication that we access to in academia, they come from the global north. They come at times even from selected universities in the global north. We are even academically enabling certain narratives to be there and to be perpetrated. And there is the need to also create a much more nurturing environment in which we enhance also the visibility of publications that are not from the global north, also to strengthen this aspect of inclusive research, which is, I think we all agree, in 2021 is a much needed issue we need to overcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. Eugene, you have someone in your group? If not, Ang, yes, please.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Thank you. I will try to summarize it. We have about 25 participants in our breakout room. So actually, a lot of discussion on the dichotomy of terminologies. For example, the North and the South, the global and the local, and the colonial and decolonizations, UNESCO-led heritage and non-UNESCO-led heritage, and the research and the gap between research and practitioners. So you can see, like, when we discuss the terms of this dichotomy, then you understand that there's a gap. And then, so we also identified that, all these dichotomy, they themselves is not homogeneous. They are heterogeneous. They are very divided, even among the North, among the South, among the researchers, among the practitioners. So some of the discussions also talk about how to bridge the gap and make it narrower. One of the way that we can do is, like, to provide opportunity for interdisciplinary, interfield collaboration and research. One example is that, to promote the university to work with the community, with the industry, and with the government. But we also spend quite some time to agree and disagree on the fact that maybe heritage is defined by politics and powers, and often then it relates to the interpretations of heritage, and how do you understand that, how do you document that, how do you interpret it. So we hope to see more of, like, local-based place-based solutions, give the local community more opportunity to participate in this research or policy making. That can also understand that, there are successful story. For example, one of our friends shared that, the UNESCO sorry, I don't get the name just now, the Geopark, I think.
Geoparks.
Yeah, the Geopark. They are successful in shifting the discussion and make it more local-based participative. So there are still chances for us to do better in a lot of other sectors. And of course, we must allow different kind of perspective and directions so that the interpretation and understanding of heritage and as well as the capacity building opportunities can flourish according to the resources that is available in that particular place. So I think I missed a lot of points, but that is the best I can do so far.
Thank you. The other group, Eugene, is someone?
So we had a very intense discussion in our room, and I would like to summarize the same. So the key things that emerged, we had examples from China, Fiji, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Zambia. And the key things that emerged towards capacity strengthening is that it needs to be a holistic approach. We need to have collaboration and equal collaboration at that. And we need to look across the spectrum. So specialization. So the next thing that emerged was that impact of tourism, and especially post-COVID, it is an opportunity for us to rethink. And then the key things that came out was the synergies between disciplines, and we need to enhance the heritage discourse. And from Zambia, the example was the process of documentation, which often ignores the language angle, thereby downscaling the aspect of resource of languages. So we need to balance that. And further, we also need intergenerational linkages that needs to be addressed. And then from Fiji, there was a question about the framework doesn't fit the criteria. So we need to rethink and classify and determine what is heritage. I think that is in every group we had this, debate about what is heritage, who decides what is heritage, and again, who are the experts. So, and then again, I would like to conclude that with the final note that heritage as an artifact should not be seen as an artifact trapped in the past, but it is something which is mobile. So, and we need to have capacity strengthening around it. So I think that's about it. And if I have missed out some point, I would really request Francesca to kindly add. Thanks, Gamini.
Thank you.
That was the summary from all three breakout groups, I believe.
Yeah, I think, yes, that's all.
That's everyone done. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
There was some really interesting discussions there.
Yeah.
Gamini, do you have any closing words?
Well, no, I am not going to summarize all this rich array of ideas, except I want to clarify one thing. I was suggesting we need to eliminate the term expert. And I gave you one of the early definitions of expert, which I heard from our friend from UNESCO, Munir Bushnagi. He said, according to UN system, there was a definition of expert. That means if someone works for UN agency for 6 months, more than 6 months, he can be classified as an expert. So that's a clarification. And all what we say is we should eliminate that terminology. And with that, thank you. And I think these are very, very interesting conclusions. And I hope organizers are happy with some of the conclusions. And there were always the idea of this who capacitate whom, and all these questions came up, and interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity came. And the point is that what we were trying to highlight in the definition, or at least working definition of capacity building, was that we need to think first, we have to identify where the capacity reside, and then identify audiences, related audiences. Now, there was a question about communities and networks as audiences. And building capacity means we are not going to teach the communities. On the contrary, we may learn from the community. But the important point is that we need to strengthen their ability to engage in decisions made for them. So this is something that we need to really understand when we are talking about different audiences and different ways of addressing the capacity needs and the way to build capacities. With that, let me thank all the presenters and all the facilitators of 3 groups and all those who patiently listen to our talks and discussions, and of course, finally, to the organizers for doing a great job, and also finally for inviting me to share this session.
Thank you very much, Gamini, for this wonderful summary, and thank you very much, everybody, for another very productive session today. I'm astonished with the brilliant inputs every day we are able to collect together and to discuss together. So thank you once again to all, to Gamini first as a chair, but also to all the speakers, facilitators, and all the participants for the very important points raised. And let's just say a few words about the next session, because of course we are not finishing our conference today. So we are continuing this afternoon with a session on bridging the gaps, cultural heritage for climate action. So surprising, climate change was not mentioned that much this morning, but we will have a full discussion on this this afternoon from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. UK time. So I hope you will also join that session or another one in the next day. So we are continuing with a series of sessions until Tuesday, the 2nd of March afternoon. So thank you very much again, everybody, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.